Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, and our dear friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get started, Scott, with what's going on in the Red Sea. And so far, the United States has lost 22 MQ-9 Reaper and two by the last F-18, two F-18s. What's going on in your opinion, and who's responsible for what's going on in the Red Sea? Is that it was because on the part of the United States, Yemenis are talking they targeted the aircraft carrier. On the part of the United States, was an accident. How do you find it?
I think what you're referencing is the loss of an F-18, um, which was being towed into position. I don't know if it was being taken out for launch or having recovered, being brought back. But the bottom line is the F-18 was under tow. That means that there's a vehicle on the deck that it's hooked up to, and it's moving it, and that somehow that aircraft in the vehicle ended up going over the side of the ship. It's not an accident. That just doesn't happen by accident. This is something that's been done over and over and over again. The safety protocols are in place, etc. But the Truman is operating in a war zone. It's launching aircraft that are carrying out strikes against Yemen, and Yemen is responding by targeting the Truman carrier battle group. And apparently, a Yemeni weapon system, I believe it was probably a drone, approached, and the Truman was compelled to take emergency evasive action. And when that happens, the ship is making a hard turn. And they will make an announcement, but you're where you're at when that happens. And apparently this hard turn to evade being struck by this drone was such that the F-18 and the vehicle that was towing it were thrown overboard. That's an extremely hard turn. This isn't a gradual turn. This is a major adjustment to the direction of the ship. That only happens in an emergency, literally to avoid being struck by a hostile weapon system. Look, we're at war. Let's wake up to that reality. The United States is accustomed to taking on nations like Yemen, using aircraft carriers where the carrier battle group operates with relative impunity, off the shores. We did this with Iraq during the Gulf War. We've done it even prior to that. Striking Lebanon, striking Libya. We're just used to our carriers operating, with little regard to potential hostile action. Welcome to the new world. Yemen has developed capabilities to interdict shipping. And this means not just civilian shipping, but targeting military shipping as well. And the carrier battle group is not immune to this. It's, it's just a reflection of the fact that, we are at war against an enemy who is capable. And if we're not careful, we could wake up one morning to find that the Truman has been struck by one of these systems, and there's been damage and things of that nature. I think it's also a wake-up call to the United States that the day of carrier battle groups operating off hostile shores with impunity are over. Yemen doesn't possess the most modern anti-shipping weapon systems. If they did, we'd be in a lot of trouble. But imagine if we were going up against Russia, or imagine if we were going up against China, or going up against Iran, nations that have more advanced anti-shipping capability. We would lose a carrier. The carrier would be struck. If not sunk, it would have to be withdrawn from combat operations. These are very expensive propositions. The carrier and its attached carrier wing, the aircraft. We're talking, hundreds of billions of dollars, plus the thousands of American personnel that are stationed on board. We're going to have to make some adjustments in how we do business. The carrier is going to either have to operate further from shore, which means that we're going to need, longer range aircraft, or we're going to have to rely more upon air-to-air refueling, or we're going to have to come up with different standoff weapon systems. The aircraft carrier is very much a legacy system. America became addicted to the aircraft carrier back in the Second World War, and the aircraft carrier served very effectively in the projection of American military power. We used the carrier during the Korean conflict. We used the carrier during the Vietnam conflict. But again, basically those two wars saw the aircraft carrier just casually sailing, offshore, launching aircraft. During the Second World War, our carriers were attacked. We had several sunk. The Japanese, up until the end, were flying kamikaze missions, seeking to, strike in. The kamikaze missions are sort of the precursor to these attack drones. We've come full circle, except that these carriers have become. They're not disposable weapons. They're not weapons that the average military leader. During the Second World War, we were accustomed to the reality that we were going to lose ships, including aircraft carriers. Today, the aircraft carrier is not built to be lost. It's built to be a presence for a considerable period of time. We have a finite number of these. And we don't have the mentality of saying, okay, well, we lost a carrier, we'll just replace it with another carrier. We don't lose carriers. We're going to in the near future if we continue to put carriers in harm's way against enemies that are developing, better anti-shipping capabilities.
Yeah. CNN reported that Houthis' successful targeting of U.S. drones is hampering Trump's mission to kill group's senior leadership. Do you think that Donald Trump is still insisting on the operation in the Red Sea, or he's going to reconsider his decision about fighting Houthis? He knows what's going on, what has been going on for such a long time.
I don't know if he knows what's going on. That's an assumption on our part. It's based upon two things. One, what he's been briefed on, and two, what he's capable of comprehending. Donald Trump lives in his own world. And he populates this world with figures and facts that aren't necessarily reflective of reality. He also is a man who has an inflated sense of worth, and he has given this interview in Atlantic Magazine where he projects upon himself godlike capabilities. It's embarrassing. No American leader is God. And the arrogance that he displays in this interview is just astounding. He has saved America. He has saved the world. No, he hasn't even come close. I mean, he's trying to improve America and, trying to improve the world from an American perspective. But the idea that he's saving anything is ludicrous. And the reason why I bring this up is not necessarily to be critical of Donald Trump, but just to reflect on the fact that the man is so far removed from reality that you can't assume that he's being briefed properly on anything. One, how do you brief a narcissist? How do you tell a narcissist that which he doesn't want to hear? And two, when you do get access to this narcissist, is his brain capable of absorbing data that, that contradicts the world that he's created in his own mind? So I don't think Donald Trump's aware of anything. I think he's put out some objectives, and the Secretary of Defense is trying to achieve those objectives. Donald Trump's been briefed that we have a multi-phase operation taking place in Yemen, where we went in to seek to interdict the Yemeni ability to launch weapon systems against Israel and against shipping. And then we move on to phase two, which is to defeat the Houthi leadership by, identifying where they are and putting, missiles into those locations. The ideal platform for this has been historically the MQ-9 Reaper drone. This is what we've used historically in the war on terror. We've used this effectively in Afghanistan. Donald Trump is intimately familiar with the use of drones. We've used it in Yemen in the past. We've used it in Somalia. We've used it in Iraq and Syria. It's the go-to weapon system. And so the planners basically said, we're now going to go into eliminating high-value targets, and we're going to use, the operational methodologies that we've used in the past with great success to target. And the Houthi are saying, well, we're not playing that game. We're not just going to drive around and let you do pattern of life analysis and figure out where we are and put missiles in. We're going to shoot you down. We're going to contest our airspace. The MQ-9 Reaper is not meant to be operating in contested airspace. And as a result, we've lost, 23 or 24 of these things since our involvement. I mean, and many of these were lost since October 7th, since the United States has become involved in Yemen in this fresh round. And this is disruptive because we're not achieving the goals and objectives of the intervention. We haven't achieved any aspect of it. The fact that the Truman had to make a hard maneuver proves that the Yemenis haven't been deterred or prevented from continuing to project their power into the region. Shipping isn't free to pass through the Red Sea, so again, the hubris that we've moved on to phase two when we haven't even accomplished phase one, which means that we're putting more emphasis on phase two, recognizing that the only way to get the Yemeni to stop firing these missiles is to kill their leadership. And now we're doubling down on that, but we don't have the tools to do this. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, that is normally attached to targeting efforts related to the drone doesn't work here because we're not able to loiter over Yemen to collect the information, to do the long-term analysis. In Afghanistan, the drones sort of hovered over everything, looking at all the movement, and you had people back, in Las Vegas or wherever they're at, looking at the screen, and they've been looking at that target forever, and they see something different. They call it in, and then they strike it. Now that Reaper is either being shot down or has to alter its flight parameters so that you're not getting that long duration look at a target. We're failing. Our military mission is failing. Now, that's what should be briefed to the president. Mr. President, our campaign has not achieved any of the objectives that we wanted it to. We have not prevented the Houthi from launching into the Red Sea. Shipping is still at risk. Israel is still at risk. The Yemeni continue to fire into Israel. And we're unable to achieve the dominance of the airspace necessary for us to effectively carry out a drone-based anti-leadership campaign. So we probably need to either find a way out of this through negotiation, or we're going to have to revamp our war plan because this isn't working. But nobody's telling them that.
But has the United States ever tried to talk with Yemenis, or they don't consider them as important?
We've talked with them. We took them off our terrorist organization list during the Biden administration. That's a conversation, and we were engaged with them directly and indirectly about Saudi Arabia in the conflict with Saudi Arabia to bring that to a close. So we have the ability to interface with the Houthi either directly or through proxy. That's not the issue. The issue is the arrogance of the Trump administration into believing that because it wants something to happen, it will happen. It's not happening. we're not getting what we want. In fact, we're making the Houthi even stronger because, all wars are extension of politics by other means. And politically, I mean, this is empowering for the Houthi. They are standing up to the strength of the United States, and they're prevailing. And God forbid they actually successfully hit an American warship. I mean, this would be devastating for the United States.
When you talk about the intelligence not getting to Donald Trump, the intelligence is, do you think that Tulsi Gabbard would not share the intelligence coming from the military, from, I don't know, other part of the intelligence, considering the case of Yemen? Who's responsible for that if he's not receiving the intelligence?
Tulsi Gabbard is the director of national intelligence. She's the figure above the intelligence community. But the Pentagon doesn't get its intelligence from Tulsi Gabbard. The Pentagon gets its intelligence for the Defense Intelligence Agency, which then is reliant upon deployed, combatant resources that have intelligence integrated into that. The analysis, the underlying analysis about all military aspects related to Yemen do not come from the Director of National Intelligence. They come from the Defense Intelligence Agency. In some extent, to the extent that the CIA has been integrated with some of these military efforts through their paramilitary organs, the CIA will also lend itself to that. But when Pete Hegseth briefs the President of the United States about what's going on in Yemen, Tulsi Gabbard has no input to that whatsoever. That's not her bailiwick. It's not her job. She's a manager. She's supposed to affect, the effective interoperability of America's numerous intelligence agencies. The whole idea of the Director of National Intelligence was to prevent the intelligence failure that took place because in the lead up to 9/11, where the FBI and the CIA just weren't talking. And they had information about the hijackers that they didn't share. The Director of National Intelligence was supposed to be breaking through that and creating this kind of interoperability. Since then, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has taken on some functions that previously were done by the Director of the CIA. The Director of the CIA used to be the big boss of the intelligence community, but now he's just the director of, or she, of a subordinate agency to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Strategic assessments are the job of the Director of National Intelligence. And if the Director of National Intelligence is ordered to by the president to provide an assessment of what's going on in Yemen, then they will do that. But the Director of National Intelligence does not run a day-to-day situation room about Yemen. That's the job of the Pentagon. That's the job of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the job of the Secretary of Defense. That's the job of Central Command. These are the agencies that will provide the intelligence, not the DNI.
Do you see the role of Netanyahu in sending in this decision of Donald Trump to send again U.S. forces into the Red Sea to fight with Yemen? It was all about Trump and his administration, or someone Israeli lobby, or maybe Netanyahu has some sort of role in that decision?
First, I'll understand that Donald Trump didn't invent this conflict. This happened under Joe Biden in December when the Yemenis began, December of 2023. So it's been over a year. It began their interdiction of the shipping. I think it was Operation Guardian or something of that nature. We began deploying ships. We tried to build a coalition of nations to support us. Nobody would do that. So we ended up going alone with a handful of regional partners, European partners. But the idea was to protect shipping. And we've not been able to effectuate that. This was Joe Biden that did it. We did it because we have a longstanding relationship with Israel. This isn't about Benjamin Netanyahu. This is about Israel and the survival of Israel. This de facto blockade that the Yemen have been able to impose on Israel, the southern blockade, shutting down the strategic port of Eilat. disrupting the Israeli economy to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars of losses. This was part of the calculation that led many people, including myself, to say that if this doesn't change, Israel will lose this war. So the United States, in order to save its ally, intervened militarily to try and stop the Houthi from doing it. And we failed miserably. I mean, we failed absolutely. One of the reasons why Donald Trump pushed for the ceasefire early on was that was the only way you were going to get the Yemeni to stop interdicting shipping and stop striking Israel. Because they said everything we do is linked to what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. So the ceasefire brought a cessation to the to the Yemeni military intervention. But when Israel broke the ceasefire and began operations against Gaza, the Yemeni once again stepped up. So all Donald Trump did is continue the policy that was put in place by Joe Biden, the policy of protecting Yemen. This is not about Benjamin Netanyahu. This is about Israel. This is about the United States protecting Israel. And it's about international shipping. I mean, as much as, I'm sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, I of course, support, the Palestinians in their struggle against Israel, support Palestinian statehood, and therefore believe that Yemen is doing the morally correct thing and stepping up and taking action against an entity, Israel, that has been labeled as genocidal by the International Court of Justice. Their actions are, conducive to genocide. Yemen is on the right side of history here. They're on the wrong side of the law, though. Free passage of shipping, is doesn't happen when you have nations firing cruise missiles and drones and sinking ships and striking ships. And so we are stepping up in not only in defense of Israel, but again, in defense of the principle of, unimpeded navigation through international waterways. Again, that has nothing to do with Netanyahu. It has everything to do with the fact that America is a nation that is dependent upon secure sea lines of communication. And that's one of the reasons why we have the Navy that we have, and we project the power that we do have so that we can keep these strategic lines of communication open. This is why we're, for instance, very much interested in what's going on in the South China Sea with China building these new island bases, because it's not just about the projection of Chinese control, beyond what we believe is legitimate based upon the territorial reach of China, but this is about those bases being positioned to interdict absolutely vital sea lines of communication that connect the South with Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. This is one of the reasons why our Navy continues to go in there, because we believe in freedom of navigation. So, this conflict, I mean, I have to be honest. If I were president of the United States, I mean, I would seek, obviously, to solve this thing by getting a ceasefire in place that resolves the issue. But if the Yemeni continue to interdict shipping, we have no choice but to retaliate. I think right now, though, getting back to the original gist of your question, either we have to change what we're doing militarily, which would mean boots on the ground, or we have to change things politically to get the Yemeni to stop what they're doing, which means promote a ceasefire in Gaza. One of those two things are going to happen, because what we're currently doing is not succeeding, and it's putting our forces at risk. The U.S. Navy and Central Command need to do a risk assessment of what's going on here. Because the more you operate there, the more the Yemeni are learning about U.S. carrier-borne operations. There's only so much we can do with the carrier. When you're launching or recovering ships, there's a specific profile the ship has to maintain that makes it vulnerable to attack. If you're recovering aircraft, you can't be doing violent maneuvering. So, as the Yemeni collect more and more information about how the carrier battle group operates, where the different support ships are, the air defense umbrellas are, and what the vulnerabilities of these umbrellas are. They're getting better at targeting the carrier battle group. The Eisenhower apparently had a Yemeni missile or drone impact 200 meters off of its bow. 200 meters. That's pretty damn close. And now we don't have all the details about what happened with the Truman here, but clearly, had it continued on its course, it probably would have been struck by a Yemeni munition. The Yemeni are only going to get more effective, more better, more accurate. And if I were the intelligence officer or the commander, I would ask for an intelligence assessment as to what our vulnerabilities are going forward, and are we able to overcome this by increasing the number of anti-air ships? Do we have to stand off at a greater distance? And if we don't do anything, if we continue with this mission, we need to be honest to the president and to the Secretary of Defense what the potential outcomes could be, that we could be struck, that we could lose one of our $100 billion aircraft carriers. And you need to put people on notice and saying, is this the outcome we're willing to do? I mean, if you're a Marine rifle company commander and you've been ordered to secure territory or defend or attack something, and it's going to be contested, you're going to lose Marines. That's just the way it is. Your goal, however, is to mitigate those losses through effective maneuvering, fire support, etc. We have to accept the fact that we're going to suffer casualties if we want to continue to go forward. But now if I'm the Marine Rifle Company commander and I'm given a mission and I come back to my boss and say, I'm going to lose 80% of my Marines, and at the end of the day, I won't be able to hold the position. Is this really what you want me to do? The Navy and Central Command need to start coming to the president and saying, and the Secretary of Defense saying, if we continue this, we're going to lose a carrier. And is this what you want us to do? Do you want us to continue going forward knowing that the probable outcome will be we're going to lose an aircraft carrier? Or do you want to reevaluate what we're doing, because normally that's considered unacceptable losses?
The other part of the conflict in the Middle East is in Syria. At least we know that Russia and Iran are out of the scene. Somehow they're not that much involved in Syria. They don't have anything to do with Syria right now. But how do you see the things that these sort of conflicts that are happening in Syria? And it seems that it's growing to be much more important in terms of the pain that they're inflicting in the neck of Israel and maybe Turkey and the United States. How do you see it? Do you think that somehow Iran and Russia is just feeling better because they're out of Syria, or what's going on there that Israel, together with the United States and Turkey, are not able to manage?
Well, first of all, I think we have to push back on the idea that Iran and Russia are out of Syria. They're not out of Syria. Russia still has significant military forces deployed in Syria. They're at the Tartus naval facility, the air base next to that facility, and there's another air base in Qamishli, I think, in Rojava in the Kurdish area, where there's significant Russian forces continuing to operate. They're not involved militarily, but the fact that Russia has a presence in Syria brings with it the reality that Syria is of interest to both the Russian foreign ministry and the Russian defense ministry. And so I think Russia is a player in terms of the reality that it is articulating support for certain policies. It's tried to influence outcomes, etc. Iran has made it clear that they aren't backing away from their support of Hezbollah, and that they were going to seek the reestablishment of the umbilical cord. The Iranians have said over and over again that over the years they have developed very good relationships with entities inside Syria, and those relationships still exist. So I think the Iranians, there's a hidden hand of Iran that's still very much active in Syria, and then there's the Russian presence, which may be, muted a little bit in terms of they don't have aircraft out bombing targets, but they're still there. There's an interest there that can't be ignored. And I would say that both of these factor into the fact, that Syria now is primarily defined not by, a Russian-Iranian presence, but by Turkish and Israeli areas of influence. And so I think, you have Turkey and Israel taking the lead on, the big picture stuff, but that Iran and Russia continue to play behind the scenes role in discussions with Turkey and with Iran, not with Israel, but Russia with Israel, definitely. Syria is just it's a tragedy watching the Syrian nation evaporate. That's what we're seeing. I just think last night there was heavy violence between Jolani's HTS thugs and the Druze, the significant Druze populations outside of Damascus. Israel has said that they're supportive of the Druze, so it would be interesting to see what the Israeli reaction is to that. HTS is a byproduct of Turkish intelligence and Turkish strategic thinking. Will Turkey back up HTS? Could this lead to Turkish-Israeli direct conflict? This is sort of the discussion we're having about Syria right now is, what is the Israeli sphere of influence going to be? What is the Turkish sphere of influence going to be? And, how is the world going to deal with Jolani? We don't have a game book on how to deal with, how to normalize relations with Al-Qaeda. Head choppers. This guy, Jolani, had a $10 million bounty on his head late last year from the U.S. State Department. Now, we're meeting with them. There's talk about, the president meeting with them. This is crazy. But it's all part and parcel of the fact that the Syria as a sovereign nation no longer exists. It's now a tragic playing ground of regional and outside powers.
We had the third round of talks between Iran and the United States, and in the latest one, they had the technical teams talking to each other, which is so important. It shows how they're improving their sort of communications. And Scott, if we assume that Donald Trump can get a deal with Iran, do you think that Netanyahu would be able to sabotage it? Here is what he said about the deal between the United States and Iran.
That works is a deal which removes Iran's capacity to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. By the way, the only reasons you enrich uranium is to have nuclear weapons. There are dozens and dozens of countries who have civilian nuclear programs, and they don't enrich uranium. So Iran is constantly thinking, well, we have to find a reason why we're putting these things in bunkers under mountains, maybe for radioisotopes, right, for medicine, or for nuclear submarines. Give me a break. They enrich uranium for one reason and one reason only, and that's to make nuclear weapons, which they intend to use to destroy my country and threaten America. Once they have the weapons of delivery, ballistic missiles, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, they will threaten every city in the United States.
I am struggling. Why would Iran attack the United States, and what's in it for Iran? Do you find any sort of reason Iran attacking the United States?
No, Iran's not going to attack the United States, nor is Iran going to attack Israel unprovoked. Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. Let's just make that clear. And Netanyahu's reasoning, this is the same idiot that's been screaming this same mantra since 1995. With all due respect, Netanyahu, and I give you no respect because I despise you. There's no reason to enrich uranium except for the fuel that's in the nuclear power plants that Iran has and they're operating. That requires enriched uranium. somebody's enriching it. So somewhere around the world, BB, there's a reason to enrich uranium. Now, what you would like is a situation where the Iranians become dependent upon outside sources of enriched uranium to power their reactors. But see, in the world that the Iranians live in, that means that people like you who hate them and want them gone will influence people like us, the Americans, to turn off that spigot, which we did in the past when Iran was trying to actively pursue its rights under Article 4 of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty to have a peaceful nuclear, energy capability. We made it impossible. We sanctioned Iran. We didn't allow nations to come in and build the reactor. We shut Iran off from sources of uranium and uranium fuel. So the Iranians are saying, no, we have to have the whole thing, which we're allowed to do, by the way. So with all due respect for Benjamin Netanyahu, he's wrong. Iran has every right to have enrichment. And there's safeguards agreements that Iran has signed and will sign with the International Atomic Interagency to ensure that that enrichment program, which it does have, is for the exclusive use of supporting peaceful nuclear energy, not a nuclear weapons program. Now, where Iran has made a mistake, a fundamental mistake, and we've had this conversation before, and I'm going to end up pissing off all your whatever the hell we want to call them, your fake Iran supporters, because that's what I call them. Anybody who says Iran has a right to a nuclear weapon, you hate Iran. You really do hate Iran, because you just mean Iran's going to be destroyed. Iran has no right to a nuclear weapon, none whatsoever. And any attempt by Iran to develop a nuclear weapon doesn't give them the ability to hold people off. It just guarantees that when we strike Iran, we'll do so with even bigger nuclear bombs.
By the way, Scott, the official rhetoric by the Iranian government, they don't want to get nuclear weapons.
Right, that's their official rhetoric. But Nima, you know, because I know you're a smart guy, you know what Larijani said. You know what the IRGC general said. You know what they all said.
If we are attacked.
Bingo. But they said also that they can do this in a matter of weeks. Now, you can't do something in a matter of weeks unless you've prepared to do that.
So why do you need to attack Iran to make them, to convince them to go after nuclear
Because
bombs?
Iran has become a nuclear weapons threshold state. That is a statement of fact.
Yeah,
Morandi admitted it right here in front. I think it was maybe with Danny Haifon. He admitted it. He finally admitted it when I pushed him. He said, yeah, we're a nuclear weapons threshold state. Boom! You just condemned yourself because you're not allowed to be a nuclear weapons threshold state, especially in a world where you have Benjamin Netanyahu in the United States looking for any excuse to shut down your program. And this is what I've been saying all along. To all the people that don't like me, stick it in your ear. I don't care. And you know who else agrees with me, Nima? The Iranian government agrees with me. Because you remember, we're not going to negotiate with the Americans. We're not going to do this. Screw America. We're going to do what we want. Wrong. Because they were confronted with the reality that I told you and everybody else. We will blow Iran off the face of the earth. They will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and Iran knows it. That's why they're negotiating in good faith, and so are we. And we're going down that path that I said was the only path possible to avoid a war. And now we're having that technical discussion, the one that everybody said Iran will never do this. Iran will reduce its nuclear program to that which is necessitated by the needs defined by a legitimate, peaceful nuclear energy program. That means 3.75% enrichment. That means having centrifuges in numbers and capabilities sufficient to supporting that, and not this excessive enrichment capacity, not a stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, not even 20% uranium for the Tehran research reactor. Maybe Iran has to get rid of the ability to fabricate uranium metal. Anything that's not necessary to the fabrication of fuel for the Bushehr reactor has to go. That's the reality. And that's what Iran is now negotiating in support of, because Iran knows the truth, that anything in excess of this is designed to create Iran's potential as a nuclear weapons state. It's a threshold power on the cusp, days away from being able to convert the 60% enriched uranium into weapons grade uranium, and weeks away from being able to turn that into uranium metal, configure it into a gun design, put it into a warhead, which they've already built, put it on missiles which exist, and fire against Israel without testing. There doesn't need to be a test. A gun design of a uranium weapon is 100% guaranteed to succeed. That's why in the Second World War, we didn't test a uranium weapon. We tested a plutonium weapon, more complex design. We dropped a uranium weapon because we knew it was going to work. We just knew it was going to work. So this is where we're at. This is the dangerous situation that we're in. And I've been saying the only way forward is to stop pretending that Iran has the ability to be to threaten the world with the leverage. Again, that's Mr. Morandi's term. This was leverage. You don't get to have leverage, pal. You don't get it. You have no right to have this leverage. And the world will respond. The reason why Russia and China aren't running to the defense of Iran is that they know Iran is not allowed to have a nuclear weapon. They support that. Iran can't be a nuclear threshold state. Iran is off base here. And thank God, we're in negotiations right now. And I say it also, thank God America is recognizing the absolute need to tell Benjamin Netanyahu to stick it in his ear. Netanyahu isn't going to disrupt this because we don't want a war with Iran. We're at the point, and I've made this point over and over again, we cannot destroy Iran's nuclear capability with conventional weapons. During the Gulf War, there was this facility in Taji Air Base north of Baghdad called a Sector Operations Center. And it was in this bunker. And we believed in the end that this Sector Operations Center was being used to direct the Scud missile attacks. This is their command center. And we were bouncing 2,000-pound, GBU 28s off of it and couldn't penetrate it. And GBU 28 is a very effective weapon, a penetrating bomb. So at the end of the war, we developed something called, we're bouncing other ones off. We developed the GBU 28, which was a 5,000-pound bomb. We dropped two of them near the end of the war. One missed the target, the other one hit it, and we thought that we achieved a control. I went in as a weapons inspector a couple years later and found out that we didn't even destroy that. Today we've got, and so these are, these GBU 28s and GBU 57 or 28s are one of the mainstays that we have. The 2,000-pound bombs that Israel drops are these bunker busters. They can't destroy anything that Iran has underground. So we've developed a new weapon called the GBU 27. It's a 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator. And we've used it in Yemen, and we're not destroying the targets. The reason why I bring this up is we've painted ourselves into a corner here by saying that Iran can't be a nuclear threshold state, a nuclear weapons threshold state. But how do we then prevent Iran from becoming one if they choose to do so? If we use conventional weapons, we can't destroy it. It's acknowledged. We can't do it. So then we have to, and this isn't a news flash to us today, although we've now used the 30,000-pound bombs that we thought maybe could do something, but they can't do anything. This is why in Donald Trump's first administration, he redid the nuclear posture. For all the people out there that, accuse me of, warmongering and all this, I just know what reality is. The reality is that we built nuclear weapons specifically designed to take out Iran's underground nuclear facilities because we lack the conventional capacity to do so otherwise. And we built these weapons as part of our nuclear posture, which allows us to use nuclear weapons preemptively against weapons of mass destruction targets. Again, for all the people out there saying, well, America can't do it. You don't matter. Your opinion doesn't matter. The policy exists. It's in place. The Biden administration certified it, assumed it. It's ours, inherited by the Trump administration. As we speak, we have a nuclear posture which has been staffed, agreed to. There's no more debate. That's the other thing I want to tell people. There's not going to be a debate. The decisions have been made that if we're attacking Iran, we're using nuclear weapons. And we have the posture to do that. And we have the employment plan where we've actually taken these weapon systems and put them out there. This is why the B-2 bomber, equipped with B-61-12 nuclear penetrators, will devastate Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Now, this is also why the W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon mounted on Trident missiles on an Ohio-class submarine operating in the Indian Ocean as we speak will fire the first strikes, which will be reduced trajectory Tridents. No one will see them coming in. Nobody will be able to warn the Iranians. They'll just wake up one day and wham, everything will be gone. And nobody wants this. Trump has boxed himself into a corner where the only alternative we have for taking out is to do this horrible attack, which will probably succeed, but will taint us. And it destroys the global economy. It destroys everything. It destroys the reputation of the United States. It disrupts everything we're trying to achieve. Trump doesn't want this. That's the other important factor. Trump has boxed himself into a corner, just like the Iranians did. And so you have these two parties now that have embraced positions that are unsustainable. Iran cannot continue to be a threshold state. And the United States cannot attack Iran with nuclear weapons. But if Iran continues to pursue that, then we'll do that and both of us lose. And that's why, despite all the stupidity of the rhetoric surrounding these negotiations, especially on the Iranian side, we will never negotiate. America sucks. Death to America. Blah, 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 blah. No, you're going to negotiate. You have no choice. But it's the same with the United States. Except Trump's been a little bit more moderate. He doesn't want regime change. He says he wants Iran to have sanctions lifted. We'll see. I mean, he's surrounded by people that don't want that. But the one thing that we know he doesn't want, and we know that the people surrounding him in the Trump administration don't want, is a war with Iran, because it would require us to use weapons that we don't want to use. We don't want to let that genie out of the bottle. This is why we're having a third round of negotiations right now that are talking about technical subjects. Technical subjects. That's how do you go about getting Iran to a position where it can't be monitored. One of the big problems facing Iran right now is that it has a centrifuge production capability that's not being adequately monitored. So we're no longer talking about just a breakout scenario. We're talking about a sneak out scenario, meaning that it's distinctly possible that Iran has built underground centrifuge cascades that aren't accounted for by the IAEA. I don't believe Iran has done that, because that would be outright cheating. And Iran's not in the business of cheating with the IAEA. But trust but verify. We're going to have to go in there and they're going to have to deal. So these are some of the difficult technical hurdles that are going to have to be crossed. But they're having those discussions. See, we're not out of the woodwork, but we're out of the political framework phase of this discussion. Both sides have agreed we have to move forward and make this work. So now they're bringing in the technicians. And that's a good step, because now the technicians are going to come up with, how do we turn this political will to have an agreement into an actual agreement? And Netanyahu can just pound sand. He has no say in this whatsoever. He will not succeed, because what he's asking us to do is destroy the credibility of the United States, to destroy the moral authority of the United States. I know there's going to be people out there, America has no credibility. America has no moral authority. Yes, we do. We have credibility and moral authority. That's why the Iranians are negotiating with us in good faith, by the way. But if we go around and we launch a preemptive nuclear strike against Iran, whatever the justifications are, we've just tainted ourselves, and nobody wants that. So I'm very enthusiastic about these negotiations. I've always said that's the only way out. I got a lot of heat from it, but I don't care. Because it's the only way out. And I've been proven right again.
Yeah. I don't know if you follow the Israeli media. They're in panic about the negotiations. They're trying to, I'm talking about not all the media, but those who are closer to Netanyahu and his administration. And do you think that if the United States and Iran can reach an agreement and can cut a deal, how would that influence maybe the future cooperation on the region, on the security of the region? I think that would be important for the two parties involved in the negotiations on the nuclear program of Iran.
Yeah, this is where it gets more difficult. This is the hard part, not the technical aspects of the negotiation, but security framework type stuff. While the United States is fully capable of telling Israel, no, you're not going to bomb Iran and we're not going to bomb Iran. What we can't tell is, or at least what we haven't been able to tell Israel is, you can't carry out covert action. In fact, even the JCPOA was predicated on us giving Israel the green light to go in and assassinate and blow things up covertly. Remember Stuxnet, even prior to this, the injection of the virus. Israel's been carrying out covert operations with the assistance of the United States targeting Iran for some time now. Now, we may withdraw from that, but Israel will continue to strike. And Israel has some very good capabilities. I mean, how do you think a drone killed Haniyeh in Tehran on Inauguration Day? Now, you just put two and two together. That means that Israel had the capacity to launch a domestic drone inside Tehran and take out. Now, Mr. Morandi and others have said, well, of course, it wasn't that hard to do. Really? Try and replicate. Israel has certain capabilities. I think what we just saw in Bandar Abbas, and the Iranians now are admitting that it could have been a FPV drone or some sort of sabotage. I think Israel did it. Israel's sending a signal that we're going to interdict your ballistic missile capabilities. I think there's another factory that just blew up in Iran, a gunpowder factory, I think that's Israel too. I think Israel is going to begin a massive campaign of covert action designed to disrupt Iran's ballistic missile production capability, and they're going to target the nuclear infrastructure. They'll begin a program of assassinations again. I think Israel is going to double down on this, and it's going to be very hard to keep Iran from justifiably saying we have to retaliate. And so I think this is what Israel is going to be doing. I don't think they're not going to bomb Iran. They can't. We won't let them, and they're not going to initiate that. But what Israel is going to try and do is push the envelope in terms of bringing pain to Iran, but you don't want to cross that threshold that prompts an Iranian, retaliation. And it's also going to be very, very difficult for the United States to lift sanctions. I know right now the Iranians are linking, technical inspections with the lifting of sanctions. And we may start by lifting some sanctions. But I think you're going to find congressional pushback. The Israeli lobby is extremely influential in Washington, D.C. There will be pushback. And so this is where I think the Russians now come in. I think we're working with the Russians. I think Steve Witkoff is having conversations with Russia about Iran, that his trips to Moscow are linked to his visits to Qatar for the negotiations. And I think what the United States is going to say is that we will no longer be an impediment to Iran fully integrating itself in the East. That'll be the compensation. While we can't stop the sanctioning of Iran by Western entities, we will stop being an impediment for Iran's integration in the East, and that hopefully that offsets this. It's going to be an interesting political song and dance, but that's the hardest part. Getting this technical agreement's the easy part. It really is. It's not that hard. The harder part is what comes after that, because the United States can't mollify Israel. We can limit what Israel can do. We won't allow them to do a straight up conventional attack, but we're not going to stand in the way of Israel carrying out covert action that Israel believes is necessary for its, legitimate national security reasons. And Iran can't just be expected to sit there and take it. And so how do we balance that? This is going to be the ultimate challenge for the Trump administration going forward. Because I come back, Trump doesn't want a war with Iran. He wants to be able to disengage and move out. How they manage Israel is going to be critical because Israel has the ability to sabotage, um, our objectives by playing their card too hard, the covert card too hard. And look, they just blew up a port, and they just blew up another factory, and they're going to blow up more factories. And I think you're going to see them start to assassinate Iranian officials. They're just going to, ratchet this up because they want to provoke Iran in a way that compels America to act militarily. But again, because Iran is this threshold state, that we can't do that. Now, what happens if Iran technically backs, is brought down from this threshold state, and you have viable IAEA inspectors operating in Iran, confirming that Iran is no longer a threshold state. Let's say we turn the breakout window. It's never going to be a year again, but let's say we get it, 6 months or something like that. Then what does the United States do? Because now, in the past, when we've backed away from the immediate threat of war, which is what the JCPOA was designed to do, is keep us from having to go to war, because Obama had backed himself into a corner. But when we backed away, we've never been mature enough to exploit that and move on and develop better relations. What we've done is said, oh, Iran's no longer the threat that they were, so we're going to resume our anti-Iranian policies. I don't know if the Trump administration, as it's currently configured, can walk away from anti-Iranian policies. I think given the reality of conflict with Iran, we can avoid a direct war. But I don't think the Trump administration has the maturity, especially with the number of pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli elements embedded, to promote the kind of relations with Iran that are necessary for non-confrontation going forward. It would have to be a different administration. I don't know if Iran has the patience or the desire to have that kind of relationship with the United States. Like I said, Iran's negotiating right now because they understand the harsh reality that exists, the consequences. But I don't think there's anybody in Iran that's saying, maybe we can build upon this and make good relations with America. I don't think anybody trusts America that way anymore, nor should they. We're not capable of those kind of policies. April 25th was just the anniversary of the Desert One fiasco, where American special forces deployed to Iran to rescue hostages that were being held by the Iranian government or Iranian government proxies at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. It ended in disaster. 8 Americans' bodies were left on the desert. America's never forgiven Iran for this, for taking the hostages and putting us in a position where we had a rescue mission go south and 8 guys died. And that resonates with the United States. We haven't forgiven Iran for the role it played in the destruction of the Beirut barracks. These are harsh realities. We haven't forgiven Iran for the role that Qasem Soleimani and the Quds forces played in the deaths of 600 to 800 Americans in southern Iraq during our occupation of Iraq. Iran hasn't forgiven us for shooting down an airliner. Iran hasn't forgiven us for the multitude of sins that we've committed against the Iranians. There's no trust on either side. There's no desire for better relations. And there isn't going to be until the generations that have been impacted by the sins of both sides, those generations are no longer in government or influencing government. You need a new generation of leaders who are capable of thinking past these events. Maybe a J.D. Vance could to be that leader. Donald Trump's not that leader. We have a Senate that's just too polluted right now with anti-Iranian, and we have, the Israeli lobby that just has this kung fu death grip on the throat of American politics. And the Iranians, they still are governed by people who came to power, came into political maturity because of the revolution. We need post-revolutionary leaders in Iran. And if we can get that, Maybe, but Iran needs to be operating from a foundation of stability. And that foundation of stability, I don't believe, will exist until they complete their pivot to the east and they become thoroughly integrated into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the European Economic Union, BRICS. If that happens, then Iran will have a level of stability and economic and political and military and self-confidence that'll enable them to, turn to the West and now negotiate from a position other than weakness.
Scott, we had the meeting between Donald Trump and Zelensky in Rome, and it seems that Macron wanted to be part of the talks, but he was rejected by Donald Trump, or I don't know, his team. Zelensky was asking again for more weapons in terms of and here is what Keith Kellogg said on Fox News, if I'm not mistaken.
This is a permanent comprehensive ceasefire, sea, air, land, infrastructure for a minimum of 30 days, and then we can extend that. He's absolutely right. The president has this one right on the money. And that's where we want to go to. And when you look at everything the Ukrainians are willing to work with, now it's over to the Russians, over to Putin. Okay, we've got one side. Now you need to come up the other side. And I think we're close. Look.
Yeah, we're close, but it seems that the permanent ceasefire is not the solution right now for the moment for Russia. But Donald Trump wants a permanent ceasefire. Do you think that they're getting closer to reach a deal? We can be optimistic about it.
Sergei Lavrov gave an interview to a Brazilian newspaper where he, for the first time, spelled out in great detail what Russia's preconditions are. The Russians don't publish preconditions publicly. They don't make declaratory policy of this nature just to back away. So these are the non-negotiables. And there is a tremendous amount of daylight between what Lavrov said and what Keith Kellogg said. I would be careful about listening to Keith Kellogg, though. See, what we have in the Trump administration is a Jekyll and Hyde administration when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. And what I mean by that is there is a camp in which Keith Kellogg, Marco Rubio, maybe Mike Waltz and others are in, that have these artificial expectations about what peace will look like. These are people who have never been supportive of a point of view that's sympathetic to the Russian position. Then you have another camp, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Steve Witkoff, Pete Hegseth, who I call the realists. These are the people who, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever in modern U.S.-Russian relations, are actually doing what JFK asked people to do in his American University speech back in June of 1963, where he said, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other side. You need to have empathy, because now we have senior American officials who are saying, we understand the Russian perspective, and the Russians are right. The Russians have a right to feel this way. The Russians have a right to believe that NATO expansion was a threat, because it was a threat. And these are people that are more sympathetic to the positions put out by Sergei Lavrov. I think the reason why Lavrov went public with this is that there was too many assumptions were being made in the halls of power about what Russia would be willing to concede. And I think by laying this down, it just becomes clear. So again, now Keith Kellogg is no longer relevant because everything he wants isn't reflected in reality. This puts the impetus on the reality camp. Witkoff, backed up by Hegseth and Gabbard. These are the people now that need to close this deal. It would help if we spoke to Ukraine with a single voice. But again, we have this Jekyll and Hyde approach, a good cop, bad cop, where we're, talking to Ukraine. And if I were the Ukrainians, I wouldn't know where the hell America's coming from. I mean, is America going to help us? Are you not going to help us? What do you believe in? What is a security guarantee? I mean, for the Ukrainians, and I don't normally have sympathy for the Ukrainians because I don't support their position. But I am sympathetic here because how hard is it to deal with the United States when you don't know, what the policy direction is? Even the president, one minute he's talking about, supporting Ukraine. We need to do this. We need to have this. The other minute he's saying, well, the Russians have a good point of view here. But you got to bring these two things together, and it's only going to be done in a way that's to the detriment of Ukraine. This war doesn't end with Ukraine getting anything at once. That's the reality. And so long as the United States creates the perception that Ukraine can get stuff that it wants, there will be no agreement. Russia's laid it out. So I think ultimately what's going to happen, I mean, we're either going to have to literally squeeze Ukraine and Europe because, Europe is like the, you've raised children, so you understand. Sometimes there's the child wants something, and for obvious parental reasoning, the child's not going to get it. But now the mother and the father have to be on the same sheet of music. It doesn't help if the father lays down the law, then the mother turns around and consoles the baby and gives them candy and rewards their bad behavior, makes the father the bad guy, etc. Or it could be the other way around, where the father consoles the baby, makes the mother the bad guy. But if the mother and the father aren't on the same sheet of music, the kid's going to get the wrong message. And they're going to go off thinking that they're going to get what they want, even though the decision's been made. Europe is the bad parent here. Europe is the one continuing to tell Ukraine, oh, don't worry, you're going to get what you want. Don't worry what your father says. You're going to get what you want. We have to shut Europe up. I mean, we really do. We have to find a way just to shut this thing down. And you saw that with Macron. Trump knows who the enemy is. Trump knows who the problem is. He told Macron, you're not welcome here. Get out. This is between me and him. You're not part of this discussion. It's the same thing with Keir Starmer. Same thing with anybody in Europe. They're not helping this at all. They think they're helping Ukraine, but they're not, because all they're doing is they're creating a situation where Ukraine is going to be compelled to continue a struggle that Russia, instead of finishing it on the negotiation table, will finish it on the battlefield. And 2 years from now, there won't be a Ukraine. Or there will be a major war between Russia and Europe that the United States may have to intervene on and undo all this work. And that war could lead to exchange of nuclear weapons. Europe is the problem, the greatest problem we face. Now, in some ways, this European problem is self-policing. And what I mean by that is, the threat of French, British military intervention evaporates if Romania next month votes in a government that says we're done playing that game. Macron has talked about potential parliamentary elections this summer, and there's every reason to believe that Marine Le Pen's party will prevail, and that we'll get a parliament that's openly hostile to this, and that could compel Macron to resign, paving the way for a different French government that will be walking away from these policies. Who knows how long Keir Starmer can stay in power before there's a demand, a vote of no confidence, et cetera. There's a whole multitude of issues that he's confronting. Germany, AfD is now the largest party in Germany. Germany has this policy of, none of the parties will cooperate with AfD. So even with the slim margin that they have, they can't govern. But as Germany devolves, as their economy collapses, AfD is just going to grow stronger and stronger and stronger until the point comes that parties are going to recognize that if they don't cooperate with AfD, then they will be eliminated. They won't exist anymore. I think that, the new German government lasts a year, if that, before there's a vote of no confidence and we get more snap elections. And I think AfD is on its path towards becoming the dominant power in Germany, and that changes everything. So, there's in the long run, I think Europe solves its own self by self-destructing. But in the short term, and that's what's important here, Europe is causing problems for peace in Ukraine. Zelensky, if you look at what Lavrov laid out. The interesting thing is that the place where the Russians are softest on is denazification, because traditionally denazification, we were led to believe that means that's the end of the Zelensky government, he's out, etc. And Russia seems to have softened that stance, and now they're looking for constitutional protections for the Russian speakers and protection of the. So they've softened denazification, which is a big carrot to Zelensky, because it means that he can say, now Zelensky's not going to stay in because I think Medvedev said it right. He's going to meet a violent end very soon, I believe, as he is compelled to make compromises towards a peace settlement. The Banderists are going to kill him. And then we devolve, it falls down. I think that's the big Russian plan. I think one of the reasons why the Russians have softened their position here is that they understand the direction that Ukraine is headed politically, and they're confident that from the chaos they will be able to impose a more sympathetic government to Russia and its needs. But the other area where there might be some leverage is demilitarization. Russia wants a Ukraine that is totally weakened, totally demilitarized, that can never pose a threat. And I don't know if that's realistic to achieve. If a compromise can be reached that has Ukraine recognizing Crimea, but not recognizing the four territories, but the international community, while not recognizing the four territories, lifts the sanctions related to that, so that the four territories become de facto acknowledged as to Russia. And then you size the Ukrainian military such that it is a legitimate defense force, but not an offensive force that's capable of threatening these regions. There might be room for a compromise here. But, Russia's not going to back away from the four territories, no NATO membership, Crimea, Russia, and the need to be confident that they're just not, by engaging in this permanent ceasefire, that they're just not creating the conditions that empower Ukraine to get ready to do it all over again. Russia needs some guarantees on that too. I don't know if this is possible. I don't know if this is possible. It's not possible with Europe continuing to coddle. It's not possible with Trump sending mixed signals to Ukraine. I mean, Keith Kellogg should just shut up. There should only be one voice speaking on behalf of the Trump administration. But now we have these two schools of thought, and that just encourages Ukraine. And I think that means that Russia will end up resolving this on the battlefield. And that'll be to the extreme detriment of Ukraine, and it creates the potential of European engagement. Because what do nations do when they have domestic political problems? They look for external threats. And so as Europe starts to devolve, there will be more and more of a tendency to say, our threat is with Russia here in Ukraine, and we have to stop our fighting and go focus on that. It's a dangerous situation. I wish the Trump administration would speak with a single voice and take a much more proactive position in that aligns more closely with Russia than Ukraine.
Yeah, here is Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that Kiev doesn't have full control over its own military units and therefore can hardly guarantee adherence to any ceasefire agreement. If they don't have the full control over their army, who's the other party that is running the show in Ukraine? Is that Zelensky? Is that the United Kingdom through Zelensky? Because Zelensky has some sort of leverage. We can understand that because he was the commander-in-chief. He was the head of Ukrainian army. What's your speculation on that?
I don't think Zelensky has the influence that you think he does. He's in the United Kingdom as the ambassador. There's a connectivity between him and the British that has been established. But for him, Zelensky isn't projecting his voice into Ukraine as effectively as some people. The power comes from the Banderists. I mean, look who the Azov battalion became an Azov brigade, which became an assault regiment, which became a division-sized unit. Now it's a corps-sized unit, and it's taken over every aspect of Ukrainian defense. It's taking over the drones. It's taking over the defense industry. And they're starting to dictate outcomes. You just had a Ukrainian brigade commander who's loyal to the Banderist ideology tell Zelensky that if he concedes the territories, that they're going to kill him. That's not Zaluzhny. That's internal. This is the danger of allowing the Banderists to exist and to infiltrate themselves into government during wartime, because they use the extremes that are promulgated by war to empower themselves. And today, the Azov Corps is the most powerful military unit out there, and they will start dictating, realities. Zelensky. I don't think Zelensky could make peace, even if he wanted to make peace. That's the other reality of it, which means that the only way that you resolve this is you have to physically destroy the Ukrainian military.
Yeah. I really, just to wrap up this session, Scott, I really do feel that Steve Witkoff is the man for this administration. When you look at the way he talks, when you look at his manner, in both talks with Iran and with Russia, you see somebody that you have for such a long time you haven't been witnessing or seeing or expecting in the administration in the United States. It's somehow a fresh air to the foreign policy of the United States. Do you think that his manner would influence the talks that are happening right now, which are so much important? I'm not trying to diminish one or the other. Both talks with Ukraine and with the Middle East, with Iran, are important for the United States foreign policy.
I think his voice is the only one that counts at this point in time. Hegseth, it's important for Hegseth to weigh in, especially on the issue of Iran and avoiding war. And I would like Hegseth to weigh in more about the futility of continued military support for Ukraine. But Witkoff is not a product of the deep state. He's not a product of the American diplomatic establishment. He has been tainted by decades of flawed thinking, flawed analysis, flawed assumptions. He is a businessman, but as important as that is, he's a friend of Donald Trump, which means that he wants to, he is here to support Donald Trump. And what's interesting is by praising Steve Witkoff, you are by extension praising Donald Trump, because Witkoff operates as an extension of Donald Trump. He's not there to try and influence Trump. He's there to report accurately back to Trump, because he understands what Trump wants, what Trump's trying to achieve. First of all, I am a huge fan of Witkoff. I know that there's people upset with him about Gaza and about Israel, but guys, that problem is so damn complicated. Nobody's going to be able to, you're just not going to get the fixes there that you want. But on Russia, on Iran, I think Witkoff's been brilliant. And what we may get out of Russia is the ability for the United States to walk away from Ukraine while continuing to improve relations with Russia. Again, that is a very pragmatic, realistic approach that, only a new thinker like Witkoff could do. Marco Rubio is incapable of that kind of thinking. So is anybody that has a, linkage back to the deep state, to the establishment way of thinking. Witkoff is a breath of fresh air, as you said. He, I believe that he is giving us the only hope for peaceful outcomes. This is why I was so against Kamala Harris. Not necessarily her as an individual, although yes, but the fact that she was very much a tool of the establishment, and that as president, we would be headed towards a nuclear war with Russia and a nuclear war with Iran. And because she would be totally 100% dependent upon the advice being proffered by establishment
So
thinkers.
yeah.
She,
Sullivan would be in the administration for
yeah,
sure.
Sullivan, Blinken, we'd be at war. Witkoff couldn't exist in the Kamala Harris administration. Witkoff can only exist in a Donald Trump administration. And he may turn out to be the savior of us all, because there is still, very powerful establishment forces and voices in the Trump administration, no matter how revolutionary he is. I mean, how revolutionary can you be when Marco Rubio is your Secretary of State? But Witkoff is he's divorced from the baggage of the past. He is solely focused on the potential of the present and the future. And I'm optimistic. Whenever I see him dispatch someplace, I'm optimistic, because I just feel that pragmatic reality is prevailing over, the old failed policies of the past.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.